Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into a part of Jesus's life we don't often think about,
Right.
his teenage years.
Yeah.
And we're using excerpts from the Urantia book, specifically paper 127,
Okay.
the adolescent years. So get ready for a fresh perspective because we're going deeper than Sunday school on this one.
Yeah, you got that right. And what's really interesting about this material is how it really takes us beyond those familiar stories from the Bible, and it shows us a different side of Jesus.
Definitely.
The human side, as he's going through adolescence, we see him grow and struggle and deal with like real challenges that we can all relate to.
Totally. And one of the things that really struck me was how, even as a teenager, Jesus had so much responsibility on his shoulders.
Mhm.
After Joseph dies, he has to take care of his whole family, working as a carpenter.
Wow.
I mean, can you imagine?
It's really something to think about. It makes you think about, empathy and compassion and leadership. And here we see those qualities being like forged in the day-to-day.
Right.
Just imagine that weight, that pressure to provide and all the
Right.
sacrifices he must have made. I mean, it really adds this whole other layer to who he was.
Absolutely. And it's not just about money either.
Right.
The Urantia book also talks about how everyone around Jesus thought he was special.
Yeah.
They expected him to be a political messiah, someone to overthrow the Romans. But Jesus felt called to a different path.
Right. And that tension there, between what the people wanted and what Jesus felt inside,
Oh, yeah.
that must have been incredibly difficult for him. Imagine, trying to stay true to yourself and what you believe in
Right.
while everyone else has these huge expectations of you.
It's a lot of pressure
Yeah.
for anyone, especially a teenager. Speaking of pressure, let's talk about Rebecca.
Okay.
This part really surprised me.
Mm-hmm.
This woman, Rebecca, is totally in love with Jesus.
Yeah.
And she even offers to take care of him and his family.
It's a pretty tempting offer, right?
Right.
I mean, what makes this story so interesting is that you don't find it in the traditional Gospels at all.
Oh, really?
No, the Urantia book goes beyond those familiar stories, and it gives us this very human glimpse into Jesus' life.
I see.
He's not just this distant figure anymore.
Yeah.
He's a young man wrestling with real emotions, real temptations.
So what does he do?
Well, he turns her down.
Wow.
He does. He says he has family obligations, of course. But he also feels this greater destiny calling him Mitt. It's kind of a bittersweet moment, don't you think?
It is kind of heartbreaking, but also inspiring at the same time.
It is. It really shows you something about his character. Even when faced with something that would make his life easier, he stays true to himself.
Mm-hmm.
He understands how she feels.
Right.
But he's got to follow his own path, even if it means giving up personal happiness. It makes you think, how often do we put our own desires aside for something bigger than ourselves?
That's a really good question. And it's clear that Jesus wasn't afraid to challenge the way things were done. Like that Passover celebration at Lazarus' house, he celebrates it without the traditional lamb sacrifice.
Oh, yeah. That's a big deal.
I know. Can you imagine the reactions he must have
It's
given?
huge. It's not just about what they were eating or not eating. See? This goes against centuries of Jewish tradition and law.
Like showing up to Thanksgiving with no turkey.
Exactly.
And how does he explain it? He says, "Let us who have seen the light of life no longer approach our Father by the darkness of death."
Wow.
He's basically saying the old ways aren't enough anymore.
Exactly. He's talking about a deeper, more enlightened path.
So we're already seeing, even as a teenager, the kind of teacher he would become.
Absolutely.
Questioning things, pushing boundaries,
Yeah.
advocating for a more heart-centered way of living.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he's dealing with normal family stuff too, right?
Oh, yeah. The Urantia book doesn't sugarcoat it.
Right.
We hear about their money problems, the dynamics between the siblings.
Yeah.
Just normal family struggles, even though they're touched by the divine,
It makes you realize that Jesus understands what it's like to be human, to struggle, to worry, to have doubts. It's something we can all relate to.
Absolutely. And maybe it was those experiences, those everyday challenges with his family that allowed him to connect with people on such a deep level later on.
That's a really interesting thought, because so much of his message is about compassion and justice and love for the outcast. Maybe those early experiences played a bigger role than we think.
It's definitely possible. And that brings us back to the heart of our deep dive today.
Mm-hmm.
How did those teenage years, those experiences of love and loss and responsibility and spirituality, how did they shape Jesus into the incredible leader he became?
Big questions and definitely worth exploring.
Yeah, big questions for sure. And it's like looking at those early sketches an artist makes.
Yeah.
You can see hints of the masterpiece to come.
I like that. And speaking of journeys, there's this trip that Jesus takes with his brother James.
Yeah.
They go through Samaria, which, if I remember right from Sunday school, was not exactly a place Jews liked to visit back then.
No, not really. It was more like the opposite of a vacation spot. Think like the Jets and the Sharks rivalry,
Oh, boy.
but with centuries of religious and political tension on top of it.
Okay, wow. Yeah, no postcards from that trip. So why would Jesus and James even risk going there?
That's a good question, and the text doesn't really give us all the details.
Okay.
But it does mention that they saw some strange sights.
Yeah.
And knowing what we know about Samaria, their mix of cultures and how they blended different religions,
Right.
it's very possible that they saw things that were pretty different from the Judaism they knew.
That's fascinating. And, it's interesting how this trip kind of hints at what Jesus does later in his ministry,
Yeah.
reaching out to the outsiders, challenging the norms.
Exactly. Even as a young man, he's open to different ways of life,
Yeah.
different perspectives.
Right.
Not afraid to step outside his comfort zone. Sometimes the best way to grow is to experience something new.
So
Okay.
okay, before we move on, can we go back to that Passover story for a second?
Sure.
I'm still kind of stuck on that whole thing. It feels like a really big moment.
It is, because by breaking that tradition, you see
Yeah.
Jesus is saying that true faith isn't about following rules blindly.
Right.
It's much deeper than that. It's about your connection to something bigger than yourself.
Exactly. And when he says, "Let us who have seen the light of life no longer approach our Father by the darkness of death," it's like he's revealing this whole new way of understanding faith. It's not about what you do on the outside, it's about what's happening on the inside.
Exactly. He's talking about inner transformation, changing the way you see things so you can experience the divine in a real, authentic way. And this idea becomes really important later on in his teachings.
It's like he's planting seeds during this time,
Mm-hmm.
seeds that will grow into this movement of love and compassion. But we can't forget that while all this is happening, he's also living a regular life.
Oh, absolutely. The Urantia book doesn't shy away from that. We
Right.
hear about their money problems, the relationships between the siblings,
Right.
the everyday stuff that every family deals with, even one touched by the divine,
It makes you realize Jesus gets it.
Hmm?
He understands what it means to be human, to struggle, to worry,
Well, so-
to have doubts. It's something we can all relate to.
It is. And maybe it was those moments, those
Mm.
times when he was just being a part of a family facing normal challenges.
Hmm.
Maybe that's what allowed him to develop such deep empathy and compassion for others.
That's a really interesting point. Because when you think about it, his whole message is about recognizing the worth of every single person,
Yeah.
no matter who they are or what they've been through. Maybe those early family experiences were more influential than we realize.
It's definitely a possibility. And it all circles back to that main question we're exploring.
Right.
How did those teenage years, all those experiences, shape Jesus into the amazing leader he would become? What can we learn from his journey, from the way he embraced both the ordinary parts of life and the extraordinary?
Such important questions to think about as we head into the last part of our deep dive.
Yeah, definitely worth reflecting on. What's interesting to me about all this is how it makes us see Jesus as more than just this perfect divine being.
Right.
Like he didn't just magically have all the answers.
Yeah, we forget he had to actually go through it all too. He had
Yeah.
to grow and learn just like us.
Right, exactly.
And it wasn't always easy for him either. He had doubts, worries, temptations.
Mm-hmm.
He went through tough times just like everyone else.
Absolutely.
But through it all, you can see this incredible love and compassion growing inside him.
Yeah, and that's what's so inspiring, right? It's not about putting him on a pedestal and saying, well, he was divine. Of course, you could handle anything.
Yeah.
It's about realizing that he faced the same human struggles we do, and he used them, to grow, to become more understanding.
And that's something we can all take comfort in, no matter who we are or what we believe.
Mm-hmm.
We all have challenges. We doubt ourselves, we question things, we feel lost sometimes. And it's helpful to remember that even Jesus felt those things too.
Absolutely. It makes his message even more powerful, I think, because it tells us that it's okay to not be okay all the time.
Right.
It's okay to mess up, to have doubts, to not know all the answers. It's how we deal with those things that really matters.
That's such a powerful message. And I think it's something for all of us to keep in mind, as we go about our lives and face our own challenges.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, Jesus' story is really about embracing the whole human experience, the good and the bad. It's about finding meaning and purpose even when things are hard. And it's about cultivating those same qualities we see in Jesus, the love, the compassion, the forgiveness.
What a beautiful way to put it. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the adolescent years of Jesus. We hope it's given you something to think about, a new perspective on his life and his teachings. And we hope you'll keep exploring your own spiritual journey. Keep asking questions. Keep digging deeper. Until next time.